Thank you for having stayed with us for the news. Now, in our first story, concerns have been raised about the continued reduction in the budget for kindergarten education in Ghana. According to the country director of ActionAid Ghana, John Nko, funding for kindergarten education reduced from 817.8 million cedis in 2020 to 43.6 million cedis in 2021. A situation, he says, if not reversed, would continue to affect infrastructure development and access to education. He made the remarks at the handing over of kindergarten and junior high school blocks at Amamfrom and Ataniata in the Ahafo region. Precious Semevo has more.
From and Ataniata are farming communities near Hwidiem in the Sutifi South District of the Ahafo region, with a population of about 6,000. The two communities have only two government-funded basic schools with inadequate and deplorable infrastructure. According to Abugri Adabogo, a teacher at Amamfrom DA school, the situation affects teaching and learning.
Our structure is very bad. Sometimes if it rains, you could come and there's water in the classroom. The teacher has to suffer to clear it out and wait for at least hours for it to dry even before he can continue teaching. Areas that the infrastructure is good, sometimes we don't have, there's no enough desk to accommodate the children.
To enhance early childhood readiness, ActionAid and their partners put up a 2-unit KG block and a 3-unit JHS block with ancillary facilities for pupils of Amamfrom and Ataniata. Here is the country director of ActionAid, John Nko, at the handing over ceremony.
It is our firm belief that all this will provide a conducive environment that can lay a good foundation for a better future of the children of Amamfrom and Ataniata. It is our hope that in partnering with the District Assembly for the provision of a model educational infrastructure like this, we will as a nation realize the importance of basic education, including kindergarten, and take the necessary steps to shore up the number and quality of infrastructure available for basic formal education across the country.
Obed Amwa Ewua, the headmaster for Ataniata JHS, said the facility means a lot, especially for female students.
They've given us a structure where we have a urinal, then a changing room that will also help the girls. Instead of when they are menstruating, they will go home and go and change and come. Sometimes they even soil their attire in front of their colleagues, and it makes them shy. And therefore, they go back home and they don't even return back.
It will have a positive impact, yes, on the children in terms of attendance and the zeal to learn.
John Nko, however, bemoaned the low budgetary allocation to KG education and wants the government to reverse the situation to aid infrastructural development and access to education.
Funding to the kindergarten sector of the education sector in Ghana reduced from 817.8 million Ghana cedis in 2020 to just 43.6 million cedis in 2021. ActionAid is particularly concerned about the outlook for the kindergarten expenditure. If these budget cuts are not reversed, it will significantly reduce early childhood school readiness and exacerbate existing inequalities between the education system. The government must begin to see education, especially at the basic level, as a right.
Precious Semevo, Joy News, Ataniata, near Hwidiem.
Now, African writers are asking governments to give more support to writers and publishers on the continent to help enhance the writing industry right here. According to them, writers document the stories of a people, and it is important that Africa resources its own writers to continue writing the African story for present and future generations. They made this call at an event to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the African Union at the W.E.B. Du Bois Center in Accra. There is more on that in this report.
The AU20 Writers Residency Public Showcase was to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the African Union. Its objective was to present the writers' completed works to key stakeholders from the government, diplomatic and international community, media, art and literary communities, as well as the public. One of the resident writers, Tony Mochama, explained that the importance of writers is to tell the stories of the people, which is an important part of development.
To record the stories. And you know the famous saying that the lion must tell its story to stop being hunted. The African must tell his story in order to stop being immaterial, irrelevant, or ignored.
He wants African government to spend more money on developing its human resource base.
Billions and billions are spent like on defense. But in our own intellectual development, in culture and the arts, it's among where the least it's spent. A lot of money will be spent buying helicopters, missiles. Our black people are warlike people. This continent will stay the dark continent, not because of skin, but because light is not shining on it.
Nigerian award-winning novelist T.J. Benson, also one of the resident writers, stated that African government must look for ways to make the publishing industry an enticing one.
I would suggest that they revamp libraries. That is the starting point, making books and the distribution of books on the continent, a priority, because that way the publishing business will be encouraged, and if there are more publishers, distributing books, this will mean they will be willing to take on more lesser-known writers, So I would ask the government to look into the distribution of books across the continent, and also subsidizing, looking into tax systems for publishers and ways to reduce publishing costs for books on the continent and how books can move easily.
The Deputy Resident Representative of United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, Sukrop Koshmukamedov, said the creative arts sector is a critical one that must be pursued rigorously by Africa.
Because the innovation and creation industry, they constitute about 1.3 billion of the world economy. And Africa is missing on that opportunity. I think by bringing this initiative and these creative people into, to be known by bigger audience, we would create the potential for African writers and artists to be more promoted and to be able to get that opportunity and get access to the creation market.
Speaking at the ceremony, Sylvia Arthur, the founder of the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora, LOTAD, Ghana, explained that she hopes writers will be integral to Africa and the African Union's advancement over the next 20 years and beyond.
It is my hope that African writers will be as respected on the continent as much as they are abroad. LOTAD, for one, will persevere in our mission to elevate African literature to its rightful place as a fundamental part of Africa's cultural heritage. It is my hope that African writers will be integral to Africa's and the African Union's advancement over the next 20 years and beyond. It is my hope that this is the start of a new chapter and not the end of the story.
The AU20 Artist and Writers Residency Program aims to use the voices of Africa's creative talent to mark a historic moment in the AU's leadership of the continent's development, unity and peace through a celebration of Africa's culture, creativity, arts and innovation. For Joy News, Samuel Kojo Brace, WE Du Bois Center.
Now, a security analyst is urging government to emphasize social justice and equity over militarization in dealing with the threat of terrorism. Ghana's fight against terrorism and extremism is expected to gain much momentum as government secures some $150 million to invest in security infrastructure against a spillover from the Sahel region. According to the Vice President, the money will go into improving facilities and security in 48 MMDAs, the northern sectors and border towns of the 4 West African countries.
The project has been conceived and designed to address the effects of the spillover of conflicts and extremism from the Sahel region, reduce vulnerability because of exposure to the impacts of climate change, strengthen local institutions, improve economic opportunities, and build public trust. This is very significant as countries all over the world are pursuing strategies to address these challenges in view of the anticipated worsening of the situation if the necessary interventions are not promptly instituted. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the SOCO project, as conceptualized, takes cognizance of regional perspectives and impact of the issues that are common to the four countries, whilst enabling country-led actions that respond to local needs. It also leverages experience sharing on prevention of the spillover effects from the Sahel, fragilities, climate-related risks in the four participating Gulf of Guinea countries, as well as conflict prevention for the affected countries.
Now, the Gulf of Guinea Northern Region's Social Cohesion Project comes shortly after the Accra Initiative Conference that saw 7 African countries engage in strategies to avoid attacks in the sub-region. Local Government Minister Dan Boche has been explaining to Joy News how the project will be rolled out.
It's a regional project, as you might have heard. It involves La Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, and Benin. And then so we are going to fight all these things together. The Ghana is $450 million project. Ghana has 150, La Côte d'Ivoire 150, Benin $90 million, and Togo $60 million. The project, as designed, has about 5 components. But the first 2 components that directly affect the communities is to invest in community resilience and inclusion, and then also build foundation and capacity for inclusive and resilient communities. So that is how the program has been designed. And there have been a lot of training activities among the districts. We have 48 district assemblies who are involved in this project, and they have been selected based on their vulnerability index and other things. And it's happening in Upper East, Upper West, Northern Region, Northeast, Savannah, and Oti regions. We are still in the design phase. As you might have heard, it was launched by the Vice President on Friday, the 25th of November, and we are still working on we have the program action manual and everything implementation programs. Various committees are being formed. Training programs are being done now, and we are very confident that early next year the project will take off.
Yes, you've talked about training programs, but what other areas will this be? Will the money be concentrated?
You see, it will require the component that deals with socio-economic infrastructure. And it will be demand-driven. Each district will be divided into clusters, making up of about 7 to 8 communities will form a cluster, and they will determine the things that they need. It could be schools, it could be chief compounds, feeder roads, dams, and all that. All these things will be done in the clusters that have been formed within each district. Each district also will have, each cluster will have a community facilitator, people who will be asked to wear existing communities in the various districts. Will be meeting together with chiefs, opinion leaders, building cohesion, so as to ensure that they are not susceptible to this extremists and the Sahel, the conflict and violence coming from the spillover from the conflicts and the extremism from the Sahel region. So that's the whole idea, to build their capacity to make sure that they are able to withstand some of these pressures, and also take advantage to deal with issues of climate change that come along with this conflicts and extremism.
But on the back of that, security analyst Adib Sani says government must not lose sight of the relevant issues that engender the spread of these extremist activities.
What we are beginning to see is better cooperation, better collaboration between the various countries. Like I always say, what affects one country has the potential of spilling over into another country, considering how closely knit we are within, West Africa. And it's important to recognize that not a single country can tackle all of this. the need for collaboration, intelligence gathering, and of course, the most important to all of this, to invest in human security is the key to preventing a spillover into Ghana and other countries within the littoral. You juxtapose the other initiatives that came before the Accra, you would realize that there was more concentration on militarization to the detriment of, human security, which I must say is pushing a lot of people into terrorism. Okay, so this is what makes it different. Secondly, it is also quite obvious that we are seeing more cooperation from other countries as against, the others that has come before the Accra initiative. Intelligence gathering has also been okay. And the elephant in the room, I proposed it during the conference. I said there's the need for a standby force. So we are able to improve on the capacity of individual countries to counter the threat by coming together to collectively do that, okay? So it has been recouched into a joint task force. Even though information about it is a bit murky, it is not clear because it's operational in nature and we need to be very tactful with the information we put out there. And it's also in the making. I think it would help because for countries like Burkina Faso, the military lacks the capacity and the capability, and that's why we see coups happening over and over again, because they are not making any progress. Mali, the same thing can be said. But when we have a joint task force, which would comprise of military from different countries, member countries, put together and going where help is needed, I think that would help. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the approach is going to be military. But they are there to ensure that these militants are not able to gain more and more large swathes of land like we have seen in the past.
Now, in our next story, Minority Leader Haruna Idrisu says the government's efforts to cut down expenditure will not yield any positive results if leaders like President Akufo-Addo are not seen to be frugal in these times. The Minority Leader referred to a portion of the budget that announced a reduction of government convoys and said President Akufo-Addo was the guiltiest and must be seen as leading the way. He argued that parts of the measures introduced in the budget would worsen the plight of the economy.
Honest economy, and as I listened to the Honorable Minister for Finance, the 2023 budget statement is replete with evidence that government is simply broke and the economy in crisis and an economy under life support that needs some resuscitation. Some of the measures may provide the relief that the economy needs. Some may exacerbate them. For instance, when you say you are placing a cap on employment into the public and civil service, how does that add to the already existing alarming unemployment levels of our country? When you are placing a cap even on enrollment to teacher and nurses training schools, not the payment of their allowances, how does that address the iniquities and the ratio of students to teachers or people to teachers, doctors and nurses to the Ghanaian public? But lessons to learn, colleagues. And I refer to page 58, in particular paragraph 224 of the minister's budget statement, when he stated, and I quote, "There shall be a reduction in the size of all convoys." Probably a time to learn from the President Atamio's example. But charity must begin at home. And it must begin at home with President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, that from Monday afternoon, we will monitor closely the number of vehicles that will accompany him on his journey, in order that he would provide.
Well, that was the minority leader. The majority leader on his part, that is the leader of Government, Business and Parliament, Oseiche Mensah-Bonsu, said the 2023 budget was good news for the citizenry because it increased social spending, which would cushion the poor. The 2023 budget announced an increase in school feeding grants, among others.
The fact that external shocks such as COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian-Ukraine war have conspired in a very unhallowed manner to worsen the vulnerability of the Ghanaian economy. These have created both internal and external imbalances, a declining economic growth, high inflation, and unsustainable financing of the current account deficit, a huge debt overhang, and a rapid depreciation of the cedi. Sadly, these variables have brought a lot of hardships to the citizenry, particularly the poor and vulnerable. In this regard, the 2023 budget intends to cushion the populace through increased spending on social protection.
Well, those were the takes of the minority and majority leaders, but that is how we cap off the AM news this morning. Stay with us, though. We get into the papers and let you know what they have to share. The news review up next.